Okay, so it's start time. So welcome to the webinar today. This is the all-in-one hub for supplier management demo that we have Barry Cook, who is the Director of Pre-Sales Consulting at Apex, to walk through Apex Portal. Barry's team leads all demos prior to a contract being signed, so he's going to walk through everything in Apex Portal with you if you're engaged with our sales team right now or in the future. In this demo, we really want to feature how Apex Portal can be used as one single dashboard for your suppliers and also your internal users. So if a supplier needs to submit an invoice via your e-Invoicing network or submit a support ticket, they can do it directly through Apex Portal. And then if you need to pull in third-party data like risk management data, then you can do that also in Apex Portal. So you have one dashboard to view everything about your suppliers. Now, during this webinar, we want to answer as many questions as possible. And if you want to ask a question, you can put into the chat bot or the chat box on the right side. And then also, if you want to ask a question, so you might have follow-up questions, just let me know and say you want to ask a question in the chat box, and I'll unmute you so we can have a brief conversation. And just to let you know, we do have our webinar on diversity and how Apex Portal can increase diversity spend, and that will be next week. So with that, Barry, I am going to hand it off to you to share your screen.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. So before I share my screen, just a sort of little bit of set of context for what we're going to do today. So more and more, most analysts recently have sort of agreed that the best practice is to deploy a best of breed functionality across the entire P2P continuum. So, end-to-end solutions tend to not work as much as they used to, and now, to have sort of a best in breed capabilities available to the organization. So especially with the emergence of some reliable single sign-on functionality and API capabilities, it allows different systems to communicate and user experiences to be maintained in one place. So today I'm going to sort of talk about 3 use cases where clients have used the Apex Portal as that hub for their suppliers. Just briefly, the first one we'll go into is where a client has used the portal to drive whether a particular supplier or subset of suppliers require enhanced due diligence, and then integrate with that enhanced due diligence or risk provider to have them log on, receive a score back, and integrate that score back that sends it to a compliance reviewer. So it sort of allows them to have a mature risk process for those subset of suppliers, but seamlessly integrate that in. The second use case is where we have a client who uses the tool to manage client service queries, so it can redirect to a ticketing system that they use to have a pre-population of that information and seamless experience for the supplier. And then the third one we'll talk about today will be one that during the registration process, suppliers can confirm their e-invoicing preference. Based on that preference, we can directly link to that e-invoicing provider, and then they can submit invoices, check the status of invoices and payments, et cetera, et cetera. So with that said, let me just share my screen here and sort of go through those in in reality here. So hopefully, are you able to see a portal page?
No, I don't see it right now. Oh, it's coming. There we are.
All right, thanks, Matthew. So this first use case is that particular one where this particular client, what they do is during the onboarding process, they capture some information about the supplier. So in this particular case, they are interested in particularly InfoSec and cybersecurity. So based on the supplier type and the estimated annual spend, business rules are configured and built in to say, based on those conditions, this supplier is considered a potential risk. So therefore, we need to do more of an enhanced due diligence process on this. And this could be any condition. So this is just a true life example, but this could be based on any supplier type, any attribute. But this is how their process works. So based on those two attributes, what happens is the supplier completes their profile and they are now required to capture some additional information. So from the Apex portal, an email is automatically triggered upon the end of that supplier record, where again, based on the supplier type and the estimated annual spend, they get sent directions on what they need to do to complete that enhanced due diligence. So they will be required to go in and actually capture some extensive due diligence requirements within this particular client's third-party application. Based on that enhanced due diligence and some exchange back and forth, what happens at the end of that process is, based on the questions, the responses, potentially some interviews and some other things that happen within that application, a score is generated. And that score, once it's submitted in this risk management tool, gets returned back to the Apex portal, and the score is a range of 0 to 100. So based on the score, the next thing that happens is the score gets sent back by integration, and then there's a business rule that says if it is less than 90, or less than 70, require an approver, a compliance approver. If it's greater than, or less, greater than, require the enhanced due diligence approver to review that and say, do we want to do business with this, and review those results. So just sort of going into the portal here, I'll just show you where that gets fed back. And then based on that particular score, again, that is where you can have business rules to say, okay, based on the results of the risk profile, let's take a look at that, and then prompt either an auto approval process if it's a low risk vendor, or require, again, additional approver seamlessly within that particular, within the portal itself. So here. And this essentially is how this client uses it, but in theory, any third-party application, we can pass that data to and pass the integration back and forth. So in this particular case, we have a score here. And then any data attributes can be passed back and forth. In this particular case, it was just the score that wanted to be passed back, but we do have other applications that may have, more granular level of information. So based on the risk score that gets sent back on the API, once that risk assessment, it will change the status to, to prompt it to the next approval or pending approver, and and then go through that process, and can always be captured, and then obviously captured in the audit log. And when annually they have to redo the risk assessment, it'll be refreshed and potentially prompt a different approver at that point. So that was the first example that I wanted to go over, from just an integration of, hey, we already have a subscription with a third-party tool. We already have a mature process, but we want to just enable our suppliers to seamlessly integrate with that, and based on conditions, trigger those things.
So Barry, I just have a question, or I want you to elaborate a little bit further. What are some of the third-party data around risk management that we're currently pulling for clients?
So from ones that have an integration component, I mean, we obviously, this is RSAM. We have other ones with a rapid ratings or a D&B, and then we actually have a logistics company who uses DOT scores. So for example, they'll get back how many accidents in the last 24 months? What is the motor carrier safety rating? How much mileage have they used as well? So basically, it's with anything, Matthew, it's possible. So that's just some flavor for how some of our clients have done. But in theory, any risk management tool we could integrate with if a client already has a pre-existing relationship with that.
And we're just basically getting the data from them, but for other scenarios, like with healthcare credentials, we would be validating it. So this is really just pulling the data in to assess risk.
Correct. Yeah. So this is exchanging data and getting a score back, whereas we could validate information if it was captured as well, right? So that's, from the context of risk within a supplier setup, obviously there's things like everybody's aware of tax validations and banking validations, but we can do things like with healthcare professionals, with Verisys from a third-party perspective, is that essentially that healthcare professional in good standing with the state, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, that can be done with a direct integration to that source, or with a validation through an API, or we can exchange data between sources as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to transition to a slightly different use case now of integration. So this is a client that is about to go live with the actual vendor registration, but currently has the inquiry module as well. So basically, it's a supplier self-service tool where they can log on and check the status of their invoices, their payments. When am I going to get paid? Why is this invoice on hold? What was that last payment consist of? How many invoices, et cetera, et cetera. So this enables them to essentially go through, and the supplier logs on and has access to an integration, just for context, an integration from either the invoicing workflow system or the ERP of these are the invoices that have been paid, pending payment, on hold, open, et cetera, et cetera. So while this solves the vast majority of client service queries, reduces emails, reduces phone calls for a client, they still have questions, right? So suppliers will still come in and say, well, why did you pay me just that amount? I thought the invoice was the greater, or why is this on hold, or some other information. So what this particular client has done is they have they use ServiceNow, and they have it for greater than obviously the vendor portal. So they maintain all of their ticketing, internal, external, to within ServiceNow, and they wanted to maintain that process and capture that ticketing process, capture metrics, reporting, et cetera, et cetera. So what they have done is, so I'm a supplier, and let's just say I'm in the context of this, I've logged in as a supplier, and I say, okay, this invoice number here, I thought it should have been $40. Why is it only $22? As an example, right? So now within the email inquiry, they can actually click directly on the email icon. And what this does is this actually redirects to the client's ServiceNow provider and actually pre-populates the information of the name of the vendor, the email address, the other details, and they can then capture some additional information, right? So it's captured what invoice they're referring to, the date, the amount, and then they can obviously put in the relevant comments and anything else that they want to do to supplement that. They can attach documents, various other things. So this is where they didn't want a separate email box or an email going back and forth, but they said, hey, we want to seamlessly have the suppliers integrate into our ticketing system so we can capture that ticket information, pre-populate with as much information as you can, and then the suppliers can add, additional information in it. So this is an example, again, just where we've redirected and integrated with an existing, workflow or help desk tool. And again, similar to the question Matthew asked, so whether it's ServiceNow, Freshdesk, any other application, similar logic applies where we can pre-populate that information and redirect that to the client's help desk as well.
So Barry, I guess within the portal, can you just talk about the help desk aspect? because I know, like, so someone could ask a question through the portal, but then they might utilize this process because it's already in place. Can you just give explain the difference between the two?
Yeah, no problem. So obviously the same logic can apply, right? So where you don't have an existing ticketing system that you want to use, and you know, the portal can still automatically generate those emails, right? So if you click on that email icon, essentially it will pre-populate the information, but it will send it to a, you know, the client specific help desk email, you know, with that information pre-populated. So they would manage it through a client service email box versus a ServiceNow where they may be tracking metrics and other things within that. So the same natively, you know, you would still have the ability to question individual invoices or payments, but it would be sent to an email box, you know, in a template rather than a ServiceNow.
Thank you.
And then there was one other use case that I was going to go up as well, and that is, one second. This is another client, and I'll just sort of talk about the use case here, where their requirements were that we want one within the portal during the registration process. We want to drive suppliers to a specific e-invoicing, you know, an e-invoicing options, right? So, and I'll pull up that to sort of show you the prerequisite as during the registration process, they want to capture as much information as possible, whether it's on banking, you know, how are we going to get paid, are we, et cetera, et cetera. They actually have dynamic discounting, so will they accelerate payments? And then how are you going to submit your e-invoices? So they give them a comprehensive help desk and some other items here, but also gives them the ability to choose how they're going to submit their e-invoices. So either through a PDF, direct entry through Basware, et cetera, et cetera. And if they select that, hey, we're going to submit our e-invoices through Basware, which is their e-invoicing provider, they will actually require them to sort of register with Basware, get an account, do that linkage, or we can auto provision a new user who already has an account, you know, or that supplier already has an account with Basware. So they, during the registration process, determine what is the preferred method, or give the option to the supplier the preferred method to submit their invoices. Once the record goes all the way through, and obviously they complete, you know, the rest of their information, if they've selected Basware and then they follow the instructions, what happens is to that supplier is they get provisioned and they get displayed a Basware icon. And let me show you this in real life action here. So let me log out and log in as a supplier who's gone through the process, been fully approved, and had selected Basware as their e-invoicing provider and their preference to submit invoices through the Basware platform. And again, this, whether it's that or, you know, any other e-invoicing provider. So again, I'm logged in as the supplier, and through this single view and to the whole context of hub rule, I have the ability to update my profile, meaning that if I have a new address, require my banking to be updated, new contact, new diversity certificate, I can update my profile. So it gives me the ability to completely, you know, control updates and edits to my registration record. I can then communicate back and forth with the client through the secure my communications. So if I have any questions, I can communicate through them. I can search invoices and payment statuses. So similar to the last client, you know, I have the ability to look at what invoices do I have, when were they paid, when will they be paid, what was paid, et cetera, et cetera. I can search my on-hold invoices. I can do a cash forecast in the next 3 months, how many invoices are going to be paid. So there's some reports that could be done. I can also manage dynamic discounting, and accelerate cash by goal and do some things around, what I want to do with dynamic discounting. And then finally, I can create a new invoice. So this is where the supplier says, okay, I now need to actually submit an invoice to this, particular thing to be paid. And this is where, based on their profile and based on them being established, they can click on create new invoice. And what this does is this integrates into the client's Basware solution. So it actually pre-populates the supplier information and a whole host of information from the vendor registration record, and then also allows them to submit the invoice information that then, once this gets submitted, converts it into the Basware format, and then goes through the invoice workflow process and ultimately into the ERP for payment. So this is where you can go through and with this integration, go ahead and integrate directly into. So the Hub for All allows the supplier to do the complete suite of accounts payable activities or accounts receivable that they need to do, from registration to inquiry to dynamic discounting to submitting invoices for payment. So it allows them, to have a single log on and be able to do everything in one place where, the intention here is you don't have to log into one system to do one thing, another system to do another thing, and another system. This is how a great example of how this client has managed that to make the ease of use for their suppliers much better.
So Barry, I have a long-winded question for myself. So one key aspect of apexportal and being able to integrate with these different systems is the buying company is going to have greater adoption of different programs. So they're trying to reduce paper checks, paper invoices, emailed invoices. So with by integration with an e-invoicing tool, what are some ways that apexportal or apexanalytix is supporting and trying to gain that adoption of the suppliers? So what are some methods that we kind of help support the adoption of those tools, because they are significant initiatives for our clients?
Yeah, so let me just give some context before I answer that fully. But, this is a great example of long tail invoices, right? Where people get emailed an invoice or mailed an invoice or sometimes still faxed an invoice, right? Which, are all sort of outdated items. But, those long tail invoices take a significant amount of resources, right? So this is where, hey, the apexportal obviously can help with the technology and the messaging and some of those instructions, but a lot of it is actually, the clients having a policy and enforcing that policy, right? So if you want to do business with us, you must, submit all of your non PO related invoice, if you will, in this case, through this tool. That we are no longer accepting email copies, we're no longer accepting faxed or mailed copies. So some of that's on but when we can support that through any number of, from just a user adoption perspective, tooltips, user guides, labels, link outs to URLs. So in this particular case, if I go back to the actual client view in this particular one, it's a great question. So give me 1 second to log on. But to drive those initiatives, right? So this may be one, hey, let's reduce long tail invoices. Another one might be, hey, let's reduce paper checks, in which case you can, mandate everybody gets paid through EFT. So all of those can be done through various means. And if I just go to this page, Matthew, I think this sort of explain some other initiatives as well, right? So if I just go back to this particular supplier, in this case, we're talking, hey, how do I reduce the labor-intensive long-tailed invoices? But equally, it may be, how do I have payment terms, agreed to? So here's some other examples where you know, if you want to accept credit card payment, here's what you do. If you want to get paid by ACH, here's, you know, what we need you to do. And then, you know, some emails. So a lot of our clients have added items, in this case, to the banking page or to other pages to drive those initiatives, whether it's, like we said, a payment terms initiative, a reduced paper checks initiative, submit, you know, electronic copies of invoices, et cetera, or even, you know, as simple as, hey, how do we reduce client service queries and emails? Let's just roll out an inquiry module for them to do that and reduce the amount of people we need answering phone calls and emails. So all of that's possible, obviously, depending on the particular client's needs and goals, right? But they can be driven through a number of different ways.
Yeah, and I think one major aspect is that it's keep staying in that one communication channel, one place where you know to go and take care of your relationship, or, you know, update anything, and then it helps just communicating everything fully. So one thing you're kind of showing right here is a couple different ways to get paid, and for a supplier to get paid. And I was just wondering, you know, with, you know, clients, companies having multiple, you know, acquiring companies, and they're having different systems, you know, do a lot of our clients have multiple different e-invoicing tools or solutions integrated? And are there single-use virtual account, you know, solutions? Or, you know, can you just talk about the broadness of how invoicing and being paid can be integrated into Portal?
Yeah, and a lot of that depends client by client, right, on their, you know, no PO, no pay policy, or do they still get invoices come across people's desks, et cetera, et cetera. So some of that depends on different levels of maturity. But yeah, we can solve for, obviously, you know, the long tail invoices, and or, you know, in other cases, we can actually integrate to the other PO systems to drive people to say, hey, you know, we can drive, like the hub for all, drive people to a PO provider to log on. So it can be, hey, we'll still be a hub for all, and your long tail invoices you can submit this way, but you could also integrate and just have the icon of their PO, you know, or the e-invoicing provider as well. So we have the ability to sort of integrate or have that hub for all, where the Apex portal is the landing zone for the supplier, but the client may have other systems in place that are, you know, they may have a mature invoicing program provider where we say, okay, you know, that's great. We can just link out to that through an icon, and with SAML 2.0, we could log in through single sign-on, or we could log in through, you know, the supplier still needs a username and credential. There's lots of different options there, but have that hub for all where, you know, you can still log on to anything. And then from a payment perspective, you know, obviously that depends on the client as well. In this particular use case here, this client has a program where all payments are paid by a third party, and they don't actually maintain banking in their ERP. So it's a little bit different. But some clients who maintain their banking in their ERP, you know, we can drive, you know, and we have driven, you know, almost 100% compliance with ACH payments, right? Because everybody knows that check payments cause problems with return checks, achievement processes, and everything else that goes with that. That some have said, hey, we're going to have a zero tolerance, no check policy. We're going to use the portal to drive those, you know, those suppliers to always accept ACH payments, and then obviously give them the relevant instructions and maybe change payment terms based on payment method, et cetera, et cetera.
Thanks, Barry. And, you know, we had the Northwestern Medicine portal up right here, and we have a couple webinars with Amy Platis. And if someone wants to learn more about what Northwestern is doing, you can go to our webinar page, and she talks about our complete evolution with Apex Portal. I do have a question here, and it is, are there any capabilities for supplier scorecarding and performance reviews within the tool? Is it possible to evaluate suppliers on their performance based on invoices, projects completed?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways that can be done. So from a performance perspective, you've really got two options. One is to have some internal questionnaires to whether that's the sourcing manager or the receiver of those goods and services. So we can have a number of questionnaires that get triggered on a periodic basis, annually, quarterly, or ad hoc, and gather the score based on that. Did they deliver on time? Was the quality good? How's their innovation? All of those performance metrics. So that can be captured and scored in a scorecard from an individual person. But if there is another system that you're capturing, let's just say you're capturing delivery on time in an automated way within another application, we can actually, similar to the integration that we've spoken about, receive that data element and put that in a scorecard. So it can be a combination of internal answered questionnaires and external data sources from other things to sort of have a holistic, how are they performing, right? Obviously, if you're comparing things against spend and invoicing and contracts, with the inquiry module, there's an ability to have that spend data. If we don't have the spend data with just a registration module, we would look to integrate that into the application to be able to run some of those metrics.
Yeah, and just expanding on that, we talk about performance right there, and we talked about risk earlier. I was talking with the client, and they're deploying Portal, and they say the next thing they want to incorporate is more data on sustainability and emissions, and evaluating their suppliers to make sure that it's not necessarily risk or performance, but it's their ethical standard, because they're in the construction business, so they're actually going to be incorporating some of those data points to make sure that the suppliers are meeting their standards, as they're a very global company. And so if anyone has another question, please ask. I'll give you a minute. I want to just highlight one thing we're excited about, and that is October 3rd through 5th, we will be hosting Elite Americas, and it's going to be in Miami, in Brickell Island or Brickell Key. We have some pretty interesting activities. The one thing about Elite is that there's a lot of networking, and we have some activities. There's a catamaran sailing and lunch. There's a beach day at the Mandarin Oriental. There's also, we'll be touring some of the restaurants and Art Deco neighborhoods in Miami. There's also golf, deep sea fishing, and a lot more. And the great thing about Elite, it's a nice intimate experience, great networking activities, and then there's a lot of good sessions. And our keynote speaker is Melissa Stockwell. She's a Paralympic triathlon medalist and decorated Army veteran. We're excited to have her speak at Elite coming up in about 6 weeks. So please go to our website, and it's right on the homepage. You can click through and learn a bit more, or just send us a note and we'll reach out to you. So I think that is it. We have a poll up right now. If you'd like more information from our team, just click on one of these boxes. We have information. If you want to follow up with information on any reports that we have or topics that we covered today, just click on that, and one of our team members will reach out to you. But I think that is it. Actually, we got a question in here. So Barry, sustainability. What sustainability or diversity metrics can be included in the tool? What would be the methodology for scoring, evaluating suppliers on sustainability and diversity?
So, and I think let me take those separately, right? I'll split them up. So diversity is an interesting one. So we can obviously capture diversity. So how most of our clients do that is during the vendor registration process. They ask some trigger questions, if you will, of, do you consider yourself a diverse supplier? And based on that, they can actually attest to, yes, they're certified, whether that's through the SBA.gov, through a state agency, through another federal agency, et cetera, and they can capture the diversity, the certification type, the certification status. They can capture the expiration date and capture all that, and then require them to upload a supporting document. So that's one way to capture diversity, and obviously that's a proactive way as the suppliers in the portal to say, hey, do you, and that covers the self-certification, which often is the largest group of that, which there is no sort of database for that. But we can also append, so diversity status. So we've had this question a lot in the past 3 or 4 months, where we actually do have a whole host of diversity sources within our data, if you will, our SmartVM data. And more clients have said, okay, I don't know how much spend I have with existing suppliers. Can you tell me which of my suppliers are diverse? So we can actually take a historical file of a client's information and then append diversity information. So from those same sources, here is where you have suppliers that you may not know are diverse. So we can do it from that perspective as well. And then obviously, again, during the registration process or through the append, with an expiration date, these tend to expire annually or biannually. So we can actually trigger notifications to come in and recertify from that perspective. From a sustainability, there's a couple of different ways. One is through questionnaires to your supplier, right? So you can have them actually answer questionnaires around where they're doing business on your behalf, if it's manufacturing, et cetera. And we have some metrics around traceability and corruption and some other things. But then you can also ask them specific sustainability questions, or have them attest to your policies and various other things. And then similar to everything that we've spoken about today, where a client has a sustainability source, whether that's an EcoVadis or some other third-party source, we can actually integrate to pull in sustainability scores and various other things as well, which can be added to supplier answer questionnaires as well to sort of have that, that 360-degree view of how is this supplier doing.
So Barry, we get another question in, and you're going to have to find the dashboard that meets the question. So I'll ask the question, then I'll talk a little bit to give you a second. So the question is, can you please show us at a high level what an improved, fully onboarded supplier profile would look like? How do we see their contacts, risk scores, certifications, communications, etc., the entire profile with the supplier company? So I think you probably could get a dashboard that could show some of that, Barry. But I do want to say that this is our sixth, actually, I think it's our 7th or 6th demo in the series. And we've done several that kind of hit on some of these aspects of the onboarding process, of the different supplier profiles, of risk scores, of fraud, of certifications. So some of these are multi-screen, and this question could actually be in itself a demo or decently long. So I just want to hit on that you should check out some of our other demos. It's just in our webinar page, and you can look through it, or we can touch base afterwards. And if there's something very specific, we can show it to you individually. So Barry, do you have something that you can share right now?
Yeah, give me 10 seconds here to pull it up.
Okay, so then I'm going to talk more about Elite and what's happening at Elite. So one thing that Elite is great for is we have a good benchmarking session, and it's hosted by Danny Thompson. He's the Senior Vice President of Product and Market Strategy at apexanalytix. And what we do, and we've been doing for the past couple of months, is we've been doing a pretty extensive P2P survey, a benchmarking survey. And we have a little over 40 people who've submitted the survey. It's only 25 questions. It takes 25 minutes to answer. And all of the companies have, I'll say this very specifically, that median revenue for the companies is about $10 billion. So all the companies are large companies. And when you look at some surveys, they're usually of smaller companies in those survey results. And these survey results are all some of the large companies in the world. And It's an ongoing survey. If you want to participate in it, then just message us and we'll send out the link. But during Elite, Danny Thompson will be going over the benchmarking results and a lot of good information on fraud, different programs, working capital, etc. So Barry, did I buy you enough time?
Yeah. Let me pull this up.
And we have more questions coming in. We can stay on here as long as everyone wants to stay on here.
Just reshare my screen, because that question, like you said, I think is much more of I don't want to shortchange. So I'll just go over this, because from a dashboard, there's a number of reports, and again, I don't want to get into demoing all of the reports that show a lot of those items individually. And obviously we have risk dashboards and some various other things. But in the context of, I think, the question of, this is a snapshot of a vendor record, and we can get into the actual dashboard, but this is how to sort of see the risk from an approver perspective. And risk is, risk can be in the perspective of, questionnaires around ethics and due diligence, anti-bribery. But also risk is more and more, are we paying the right vendor with the right tax ID? Does the bank account belong to that vendor? So this is sort of a snapshot of, what you can see of, hey, this supplier record, we have the right address, the right banking. In this particular case, we have a bank ownership that is incorrect. So that's a red flag to say, hey, we need to do something about this. But, based on the corruption score is good, the business continuity is good, it's not a duplicate. But they do have an issue with the ethics questionnaire, right? So this sort of drills you down to a high level, and then you can actually drill down much, much further into either, and again, I won't want to shortchange, into the specific questions that have been answered by a supplier, or I think, to your point, Matthew, the risk dashboard, right, which sort of prompts, overall, how are you doing across? And if I just drill into this particular, the same vendor who we looked at, the vendor controls, how are they doing across all of these various different items, right? And this is much more from a risk perspective, but we can layer in diversity and other things, right? So it sort of covers how they're doing across these different risk questionnaires and different subcategories of risk. So there are a number of different dashboards and reports that can be generated, but a high level, this sort of is just some of those items that can be shown.
Thanks, Barry. And someone messaged me asking that question of, they said, I didn't even know the webinar page existed on your website. Yes, we do many webinars a month, and most of them are with clients. This series is just demoing Apex Portal. So please dive into those webinars. It usually has a case study of how different clients are leveraging Apex Portal. And we had another question come in, and some of this is going to be discussed next week. And let me just make sure. I think, so it's a follow-up regards to supplier diversity. So Barry, is there tracking that is done to identify both tier 1 and tier 2 diverse suppliers and the spend? And I just want to comment beforehand. I know a lot of companies have a lot of goals regarding supplier diversity and spend, and tier 2 is kind of the trying to identify all the spend, because many times you're working with a supplier and a lot of their suppliers are diverse. So it's important to count that spend, because it really is going to those diverse suppliers that you're aiming to spend with. So Barry, what kind of tracking is done for tier 1 and tier 2 diverse suppliers?
Yeah, so right now, a lot of that is captured by the supplier. So obviously, most clients don't want to capture tier 2 spend on their entire supplier base. It's usually just their strategic suppliers, usually 20, 30, 50 suppliers. So what we can do is we can actually send periodically, usually quarterly, notifications out to those, and actually have an email that goes out, and they would log on and capture tier 2 indirect, tier 2 direct spend, and capture that information. And then in some instances, there is a request from the clients to capture some supporting documentation, right? Because you're taking them obviously at their word, because that's the only way you can do a lot of that, know their spend. So a lot of times they'll ask for a statement or some document to support that spend, that they're saying, hey, here's our tier 2 spend with these suppliers, and just do that quarterly survey out to them to capture that information and report from that.
Okay, great. And Angela, who's behind the scenes right now, she posted a link to the apexportal supplier diversity webinar, which is next Tuesday at the same time. So you can just follow that and register for it. And we can answer any additional questions regarding that next week. I think we answered every question. There was a lot coming in, so if we missed anything, we're happy to discuss it later. Barry, did you have any parting words?
No, just that, like I said at the beginning, more and more, and a lot of the analysts are saying this, that, hey, no longer is an end-to-end solution viable, but having best of breed across the board, but putting them in a central hub is what a lot of the analysts have found is the best way to move forward. So obviously what we've shown here is, hey, you may have other systems, but you want to make it as seamless for your suppliers as possible. So hopefully we've demonstrated how some real life use cases have been managed through the apexportal for that.
Couldn't agree more. Barry, really appreciate it. Everyone, I love when the questions come in, so I hope to see you next week. And if anything pops up, just send us an email and we'll be in touch with you as soon as possible. Everyone, have a great day. Bye.